All right. Hello, everybody. It's been a little while, but we are doing another home style podcast, and I like to look at them as just conversations. And so, with my new friend Jake
Epstein.
Epstein, because I've got Steinbrenner in my head, and I've got Juan Epstein from Welcome Back, Kotter.
Yeah, so that
Are
was
you old enough to remember Welcome Back, Kotter?
yeah, my first college nickname was Juan Epstein. So I had to figure it out real quick the first day we were there. It was Juan, and then it was Juan for 3 years. So it was awesome.
That just references in our head, right? Did you ever see the show?
Yes, of course.
He was famous for always having a note from his mom on why he didn't have his homework or
Yeah,
why he didn't do his, so somehow that might be related to our topic today, but
I think so. Yeah, hopefully we were a little more accountable than Juan was.
well, we'll go with Jake for today and that one. But
Yeah.
Jake, thanks for spending some time. You and I've gotten to know each other kind of, quite a quick here and there through the softball world previously, but through a mutual acquaintance, Coach Horton kind of suggested we kind of get together, and you and I have had a few conversations. People that know me know that I'm not into the front of softball, like, oh, we're gonna do this and that and song and dance. It's hopefully they know that whatever we're doing, spending our time with, it's real. And so today's conversation is just the real part of like the art of hitting, the art of the game. But I want to start by telling anybody that's listening, we know that there's a lot of disagreements on how to do things, right? So there's the analogy that I'm going to start off with, since I'm the analogy king, self-proclaimed, is we're chefs, we're just going to talk cooking, and we're not here to tell anybody what you have to do. We're going to share kind of our conversations, which for myself personally, I really, really enjoyed. I think that there's been some unique common denominators that are kind of hard to find. I'll ask your opinion on those too. But it's really about just sharing opinions. I want you to, if your ears start as being closed and you're kind of pessimistic due to your experience in softball or whatever it is with youth sports, understandable. But have a listen, because we're just going to talk about some things that always, for me, we want it to be relatable to people. And for that closed-minded, closed-eared person, understandable for something to go, hey, wait a minute, that kind of makes sense, right? And it sounds like they're talking about me, but they don't know me. And that's always kind of the fun of this. So, Jake, I'll start a little bit with your background. Anyone that knows the game knows Epstein, knows the name. It's been around instruction. Dad's been around as a hitting instructor for a long time. I can go back to my first days of instruction in 1987, 1988. There weren't many names back around back then, but pretty early in the process, I knew of your dad's name. And it's interesting because the first book that I grabbed was the Art of Hitting by Ted Williams, or Science of Hitting by Ted Williams. But there wasn't a lot around. So dad was a big leaguer, 10-year career, right? So now tell me about that and that background and how that immediately affected you as a son of a big league ball player.
Yeah. So, being surrounded by people that played the game that you watched on TV was obviously really cool. I'd come home and Eric Karros would be at the house, or Raul Mondesi would be in the house, or Mike Piazza, and you got to hear that they're normal people, they're regular people that are trying to get better, just like a 12-year-old baseball or softball player is around the country. So growing up that way was pretty cool. I was, of course, the guinea pig with all the hitting ideas that my dad had. He played for Ted Williams for, I think it was 2 or 3 seasons with the Washington Senators. And thereafter, he would go to Florida. This was after my dad retired. He was in private business, and he would spend a week with him. And this would have been like in the 80s. And they would just talk hitting. So the hitting background came from that. And I remember my dad always saying, in 1969, their team batting average, I think, went up 30 or 40 points. And Williams never talked about mechanics. He never talked about, now his book does, and he had his ideas and his absolutes, but he never talked to this big league club about hitting. Now, I will tell you a funny story. In spring training that year, they were doing rundowns. And so my dad was a first baseman, and they were doing pickoffs to first, doing rundowns between first and second base. And anyway, as halfway through, they're doing it. One of the infield coaches is saying, no, after you release the ball, you got to peel this way. And the other guy's like, no, we want to say ball, or we want to say now, or we want to. Anyway, and there's all this commotion, and Williams is in the dugout, and he's just chatting with reporters. He's not even part of this, drill that they're running. So he sees everybody arguing. So he runs out towards second base, and he says, what the heck's going on here? And I think Wayne Terwilliger was one of the assistant coaches is saying, well, we need to do it this way. We need to do it this way. One of the other assistant coaches said, well, that's BS. We need to do it this way. And Williams looks at both of them and said, who gives a blank? Let's hit. And that's essentially what the 1969 Senators were. It was a team that was built on offense, and they talked hitting and they hit a lot and they practiced a lot, and nothing was mechanical, and the results came. Now, defensively, they likely finished last in their division, but that's besides the point of this story. It's you have to really dive deep into it. So the hitting stuff came from him. He would come back from Florida and they would hit a tree, and Williams would watch my dad and watch where his hands were and what his feet were doing. And he would talk about separation, his hips going first. And then he would come back home, and then I would have to put the bat against my shoulder and do all these drills. And it started to work, and then it bled into our 13-year-old travel team and kind of took off from there.
Well, I want to, because you brought up something that I had made as a note, because there's the science of hitting, right? Which was an explanation of how to swing the bat. And then there was his game approach, right?
Mm-hmm.
So was that kind of built into the conversation with you and your dad, or would he talk about that was actually, those are two separate conversations when he talked about practicing and when he talked about getting a good pitch to hit? Or
Yeah, I mean, the mental side was probably the most important, quite honestly. And I was young at the time, but he would tell me they would sit and watch a game on TV, usually a spring training game, because that's when he was down there, and they'd watch a game on TV, and Williams would talk about what the pitcher was going to throw on every single pitch, right? So you got 200 pitches in this game or 250 pitches in this game, and Williams would talk through every single one to my dad. What would you look for here? What is this pitcher trying to do? Okay, what did this guy do his last at bat? What should he look for his next at bat? And it just got the wheels going. And so I was the recipient of all that information, probably starting when I was about 10 or 11 years old, and not really knowing. I would just sit down and watch a baseball game with my dad, and we would talk about that process. And over time, you start to learn, there's patterns here. And I think people don't watch the game enough. And even in softball, every game is at least in our conference, when I was in the SEC, like every game is televised. And the people that are doing the announcing, not all of them are the top tier announcers, but they played the game and they can share information about what a pitcher's trying to do, maybe what the infielders are trying to do. But unfortunately, we live in this society where kids just want to watch the highlights. They don't want to listen to the commentary. And this game is about commentary. This game is not, a 12-minute game full of highlights. It's the entire experience of 7 innings and what it brings to the table. So I urge everyone to sit and watch games, because that mental part of it comes through with all the announcers that sat and played the game for years and years.
Yeah, it's a great point. I talk to our kids about there's having the race car on the track, which you're competing against other drivers, and then there's you in the garage. You pop the hood, whatever's in the carburetor. That's that. But those are two different places, and that's a big part of what we talk about is wanting to inspire and educate players, and especially taking the level of experience that they have by the time they're in high school. A lot of these kids have been playing 10 years, right? But do they have that perspective? And probably a disclaimer to anybody that knows me or plays for us knows that I didn't bring you in to tell the story of how much Ted Williams pays attention to pitch detail. But I really feel like my kids are fatigued, or our kids on our team are fatigued at the end of a weekend, because it's a nonstop. I said, you should be mentally or emotionally kind of fatigued from paying this level of attention to every nuance that gives us information to what could be happening next. And baseball and softball, just those games, is a game that information can be utilized. And most people haven't been taught. You had this woven into your fabric, so a lot of attention to detail from a young age. So it wasn't overwhelming. It was just the way you were raised, or was it kind of hard to process at first until it kind of find its pocket?
No, it was just presented in a way that was it was just part of a daily conversation. And then it was part of a game conversation. And then we would review at bats. We would, and I didn't know what the heck's going on, right? I'm 13 years old. We're going to go play a doubleheader in San Diego. And I'm going to get whatever, 8 or 9 at bats, right? It was different. They weren't tournaments. They were just Sunday doubleheaders. And we lived in Orange County at the time. So, we had an hour and a half home. And he would ask me, what was your first at bat like? Oh, well, this, that, and the other. And what pitches did you see there? Which pitch did you swing at? Do you remember which pitch? Yeah, I swung at the third pitch. And where was that location? Well, it was away. And then he would say, well, what was the count? And I would say, the count was 2-0. And he would say, well, do you think that was a good decision to swing at a 2-0 pitch on the outside part of the plate? Were you looking for something on the outside part of the plate? And I'm like, looking? Like, I'm just trying to swing the bat, Dad. I'm trying to get on base. And so then the next week, the same thing would happen. And then all of a sudden, you kind of figure out, you know what? I need to be a little bit smarter. And why do I play with? So I grew up with Eric Chavez, who was a big leaguer for, 15 years. And that dude could do anything he wanted. He would just toy with people at that age. But I would go back and I would watch his at bats because he would walk most of the time, right? But then he would get one pitch and he would get strikes. People, he'd be behind in the count sometimes, but he never swung at something off the plate when he was ahead in the count. And when you're looking at a 14 or 15-year-old kid at that time, and you're like, well, how does he know how to do that? And well, maybe he listened. My dad was coaching that team. Maybe he listened to my dad a little bit more than I did. So it just has to be part of daily dialogue. And I know you guys talk about that. And that's where you learn. That's at the highest level. That's how you have to play this game. You need those small advantages if you want to compete at the Division I level or the Power 4 level. You need every edge you can have because pitchers are so good and pitching coaches are even better, and they know where to throw you, and you have to be able to beat them to a spot sometimes.
At the level you were coaching at, yes, that's only at the elite level for us. At the grassroots level, most people are extremely predictable, and
Mm-hmm.
most pitchers haven't prioritized the things that really lead them to be efficient in these strategies. And so it really is that kind of anticipation of who you're facing and where they're at, right? I'll call it their altitude of the game. And then you just set your traps, right? I mean, that forward thinking mentality of we don't have to win, but we expect to win, right? I expect to get a hit every single time. I'm surprised when I don't. That's a just miss, not a what did I do wrong with my swing, right? And so for anyone listening so far, you could clip it right here. Just stop. And what you just mentioned about the post game debrief, okay, and those questions that you were asked, that needs to be printed, and just a small, simple chapter 1 handbook to how to professionally support your daughter or child when they're playing this game at a higher level. It's not the instant diagnostics of what you did wrong. And because the story from the player, right? How did you do? I dipped, I dropped, I pulled off the ball, I rolled over. Like that's instant. I'm going to say again, I just see things in my head. I'm going to go 75% of dialogues when the outcomes weren't good, go right to diagnostics, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that story, you and I were talking a little bit about before we started here, is that story from a trained player. So you had it woven in. And that's why watching like Sons of Major Leaguers, it was woven into them playing catch the right way. Somewhere I read that, Ted Williams telling your dad about emulating great hitters.
Mm-hmm.
Watch what they do. Just watch it. Because my education as an instructor was a forehead VCR. There wasn't a lot of podcasts, there wasn't anything back in the 80s. So it was okay. The forehead VCR allowed me to have the shuttle to go back and forth, right? And then I was watching tennis, I'm watching golf, I'm watching everything. And you did start to see athletic similarities in different sports, right? And different things. So now it would be core and different things like that. But that dialogue of what did you swing at? Um, you know, one of our phrases, talk less about how you swung it and more about what you swung at as far as game time goes, right? What pitch was it? You talking about Chavez laying off a pitcher strike, right? Laying off of something he's not looking for. Count management. They're not, it's not rocket science, Jake. It's not, they're actually very palatable conversations. It's a perspective that wherever this went off on this road over here, the great news for anybody that wants, I'll just say more peace of mind, right? But I would also say, wouldn't you agree? The key to a batting average, the key to an All-American status, the key to a contract is swing at more good pitches than you swing at bad pitches, right? I mean, it gets into some pretty simple stuff, but that dialogue sounds different. So right here already, we've got something that if you're a note taker, I just go back or watch this recording and go back because you were dead on with that. So have you written that down? Is that somewhere in your presentations, a book or something? Because it's pretty simple, but it's not out there.
It's not. No, you're right. It's probably in all. I have an online training academy, and it's probably in 60% of the voiceover annotations I do with players when they send me game video. But yes, I should probably just put one out on a little audio blurb to the masses, in that, because it really is. And it seems easy. Oh, swing at strikes, right? Swing at good pitches, but you have to practice that.
You got to weave it in your dialogue. Like you actually, everybody knows it. 100%
Yes.
of people are going to nod their heads that they agree with it, right? Then we ask them, so when's the last time you said it? It's
Yeah.
kind of like, I know you love your daughter. I know how much our dads love their daughters, right? But between the critique and then reminding them how beautiful they are, which it's not going to be a 50-50, but it can't be 98-2, because in the end, her validation comes from how dads feel about her, right? I'm a guy, I got a lot of years experience. I've watched this. Then you can rip them a new one on the decision on a 2-0 count, because that's just about the decision that was made in a situation. It's not about your being, it's not about your worth, your value. That was just, and then you could always save that with, but that's what this game is, because there's no level where there's not a bad decision made or a mistake made by a pitcher or someone chasing a ball out of the zone. That's the game, man. You're trying to just minimize that stuff, right?
Pitchers are really good.
Yeah.
Pitchers are really good, and they're not trying to just dish it up to you, right? They're trying to get you out. They're competing, and you have to realize that as a hitter. Like, this isn't just stepping in the box and trying to make contact with someone. I'm trying to compete with that person on the mound. They're coming right after me. I'm not going to give an inch here. And if you have a plan to help back that up, you're going to be in much better position to succeed. But you're not going to succeed every time up there, right? You're going to chase bad pitches. But the key, don't miss those mistakes. When you get those mistakes and they're in your advantageous count and you're looking in your zone and we miss them, then we got a problem. If we're late, right? Why would we be late ahead in the count? I remember my dad yelling at us all the time. How can you be late ahead in the count? He said that Williams had a sense of, he had an innate ability to create curse words. We'll put it that way. Words on top of words. So when they played in Washington, RFK Stadium was the old football stadium where the old Washington Redskins played. And it was big, right? For a baseball stadium, it was big. It was seated probably 70-something thousand people. And nobody cared about the Senators, right? There'd be like 1,500 people at a game sometimes, right? Especially when the weather was bad early in the year. And so I'll never forget this, because my dad was like, he painted the perfect, and I don't know who was hitting. He was on deck. And my dad's on deck and he's looking around, and people in the stands, and somebody in front of him swings at a 2-0 pitch, fouls it back because he's late. And Williams comes out of the dugout and just starts chewing him out with 5 different curse words on top of curse words. And my dad, he's standing right next to my dad. And my dad's like, you get it. Like, I'm glad nothing's on TV tonight. And so Williams goes back, and my dad turns and looks up in the stands, and he saw like 40 people with kids walking out of the stadium because those curse words just echoed all over the place. But because of that story, I'll never forget, we were in, I think it was before I was at Fullerton. So it was the Big 12 tournament at Mizzou. We were playing in Oklahoma City, and he was like in the upper deck. Like, he had family seats were not good. I think we were playing Oklahoma State. And I fouled off a 2-0 pitch, and on the next pitch, I don't know what happened, but I flew out, I think. And as I'm running back to the dugout, I'm kind of looking up because I know where he's sitting, and he's looking at me and he's just shaking his head. Like, I knew what he was
You knew
going to
exactly
say.
what he was thinking.
Exactly what he was thinking. Like, you just can't miss that pitch. Now, 2-0 is a great time for a changeup too, and people are going to be out in front. But if you have the right mentality, and you have that confidence in yourself, you have to be on the pitch that you're looking for. And that's where the mechanics, because kids talk about mechanics and, oh, my elbow this, and you can do it at home, do it at your cage when you're at, your indoor facilities, and you're making sure your swing's in a good place. That's when it really matters, because if you do have bad mechanics, then you're not going to get to pitches consistently. However, if you're thinking about mechanics when the competition starts, you're going to be in real trouble. Like, you have to prepare for what you want to do. You have to see what the pitcher's doing. what pitches he's getting over for strikes, she's getting over for strikes. You know, you can look down on the bullpen, you can see how she's throwing the first few hitters. Then you got your plan, and then it's like, okay, I'm going to take my best stuff against you and let it happen. But if you're thinking I got to keep my shoulder here and my foot here and my knee here, you're going to be beat already. Too many thoughts going through the head.
Oh, and it's important because again, the intentions are good, but there's not this clear navigation in front of a lot of people in softball to differentiate that, right? So they're well intended, but they actually are thinking. So self-awareness, right? Self-awareness of number one is what am I being taught and when should I be thinking certain things? You know, a kid, I call it the duh theory. So you get a middle and first pitch and you take a hack and okay, you miss it, you foul it straight back or something, right? And then you swing at the 0-1 changeup and dribble out to third, like duh. Like you could be probably mostly blind and see someone take a good swing, and just human nature is not going to say, well, let's throw that same pitch, right? It's going to go to something deceptive. And there's again, get deep in the conversations, we'll keep it up near the top. But those types of things, when you start to see a player manage the count, right? So what were you thinking in that count? Thinking they're not going to come to me, right? I'm thinking, listen, she didn't have great command, because we deal with both down here, right? We deal with not these pitchers that have 65, 70% command. You never know. So we expect our players to already have that calculated. Listen, she's up 0-2 or 0-1, but she's missing all the time. So that's why I was still in a half aggressive kind of mindset. So if there's a 2-0 count and your batter just misses the next pitch, one result would be a foul ball straight back, or a high pop up to shortstop for a right-handed batter. Which do you take?
The foul straight back.
Because
we got another chance.
Okay, let's think in terms of contact now. Of which one were you closer to hitting a home run
on? Well, I guess it depends on the player. I'd have to know. So a lot of times a infield pop-up, if it was a high fly ball to left field, I'd be okay with that. If it was a cut pop-up to an infielder where they cut underneath it because they probably collapsed their front arm, that one I wouldn't be cool for. And the reason is because I just went through an entire SEC season where I saw too much of that and it made my hair turn gray. But yes, there's a big difference between an infield pop-up and outfield fly ball in terms of, I think the timing is probably the same on those. But that left arm, that lead arm in softball, especially with right-hand dominant players, a right-hand hitter and a right-hand dominant player, that lead arm is their non-dominant arm. It's not strong. Right. And so what happens is when we're top hand dominant, that's when we get maybe a little bit too under with our right elbow, right? We're starting to use that hand I'm getting a little bit into the mechanical.
Yeah, right. No, good.
We're starting to, like when we grew up playing, it was, remember, bottom hand, and then the top hand came through, right? And provided the power. Well, now everything's taught kind of with that back arm, and a lot of times it leads to that barrel dropping underneath and fouling a lot of balls off. But what I've found in softball over the past year is that left arm, the ball is so heavy and the bats are so light that the ball, if you don't center it, the ball moves the heck out of the bat, right? And so if they're not strong with their lead arm staying in position, then that arm collapses, they cut underneath it, and they hit a lot of those infield pop-ups. So I do a ton of bottom hand work or non-dominant work with my hitters, just because it has to be, if you look at the science of the swing, the front side initiates everything, right? You stride and you land, and the energy hits your left foot, and then you start to push back and rotate. So the first, like if you were on ground force plates, the first bit of energy is your left side, which includes your left arm. And then once the process starts, maybe the first 10, then after 10% or so of energy, then the backside, right, is powering through and coming through. So it's a really, the legs are usually pretty easy for those players that are right-handed throwers and right-handed hitters, because when you throw and hit it, the movement is the same, right? The footwork is exactly the same, the first move, right? If you take a player throwing a shortstop, throwing across the infield, and you stop her right when her front foot lands, and then you stop a hitter in that same position when their front foot lands, it looks very similar. But it's the upper body that's different. And so many times when you get left-handed hitters that are right-hand dominant, their lower body doesn't work right because they don't have those thousands of reps of playing catch. So sometimes what I'll have players do that are kind of goofy, left hand, my daughter's one of them. We'll call her Goofy because she is goofy. Now I have to make her watch this so I can call her Goofy on the Firecrackers network, but she's a right-hand dominant player. She hits left-handed. And so I used to make her try to play catch left-handed just to step, right? Just to kind of step and feel the way the front foot lands and the back heel releases, because she used to just spin. It was an artificial move with the back foot. So, you touched upon, oh, I watched tennis, right? I watched every sport that was out there, right? I watched football players and
How about cricket? Holy cow.
cricket or
Talk
hockey.
about talk about hitters.
Yes, it's like if you are an athlete and you move like an athlete, it makes this game so much easier. And pigeonholing sometimes kids into you need to pick a sport when you're 8 or 9 years old is just not fair.
Yeah.
And we used to play every sport because you didn't have to sign up, right?
Well, I wanted to ask
I'm
you
gonna
that
go to
real
the
quick to
park to play hoop.
go back to your childhood. So you were getting some high level conversations, but what were your summer vacations like? Were you a wiffle baller? Were you playing all the sports, doing everything? Like what were you like at from 10 to 12 or 9 to
Yeah, always. So I played a lot of basketball. I played volleyball. Just I don't know why, but it was what we did with friends. It
we're
wasn't
doing,
like
right?
parents said, go do this. We played so much over the line down at the beach. Like we would go play over the line. When I lived, we played strikeout in front of the garage, right? That was the big after school. And that was younger. That's actually before I moved to California. We would play strikeout with my buddy's older brother, and he would just drill us with tennis balls all the time. But we just played in the cul-de-sac, right? We're trying to throw the ball as hard as we can, and then we're trying to hit the ball as far as we can. And who cares if you strike out? Because that's the name of the game, right? The pitcher's supposed to win in this game. And it was all games, right? And then it was wiffle ball. And even when we went to travel ball tournaments, when that started, I guess it was called travel ball. I don't know. I guess we went to the World Series, right? There was a CABA World Series at some point. But what did we do between games? Like we played wiffle ball
Or tape ball or paper cut ball or whatever it was, right?
whatever it was.
And it didn't matter if there was one kid. If you were by yourself, you could play. You had one kid that you were going to play one-on-one. There's 3 kids, you're gonna figure that out. There's 10 kids, you're gonna figure that out. Like there was no limitations to like us being able to play. If we went to a wedding reception, right, we'd see who was there, and then we're gonna figure out. My son grew up with going to the park all the time with me when I was coaching, and he'd always ask me, what teams are you playing? Because he would know which kids were going to be there from those teams, and then he would have an idea what his day was going to be like and kind of what he was going to do. So that great part of your childhood, and then you got an opportunity to play at Cal State Fullerton for Coach Horton and play some pro ball. So that was our common denominator there. So you had a lot of great coaches, great influences, even in pro ball. I'm sure you were around a lot of great people.
Yes.
I want to ask you, when you were a player, what either coaches or former big leaguers were you able to meet, and any conversations that might have influenced you, just some other things? And then I want to compare it back to still what you got from your dad, from Ted Williams. All right. So as a player, sometimes there's pretty impactful conversations you may have if you're lucky.
I mean, Coach Horton was the best, right? I mean, he made you feel comfortable in your own skin. And when things were going bad, he made you find the positive in that bad, right? He would talk to you not necessarily about your swing or what was going on, but hey, how are we feeling today? How was class today? Who are you rooming with? How are your roommates doing? Your roommates doing okay? And he would kind of get you out of this.
The bigger picture,
right? And I was in a bad situation when I transferred to Fullerton. I broke my foot in summer ball. I fouled a ball off my foot in summer ball, and I had a good year before. So I go to transfer to Fullerton, and I'm on crutches, talking to them. Hey, can I come here and play? And it was different. There wasn't a transfer portal back then.
Right.
I was just going home essentially. It was cold in Missouri. And so I went there, and they're like, we'd love to have you. We need some power, right? We need our first baseman signed. Whatever. So I go there. The problem is the rehab was really bad, and my foot didn't get better. So I was playing on a foot that was, the size of a basketball. all fall trying to kind of show him what I can do. And when the season rolled around, Coach Horton came up and said, I don't think I can take you to Stanford. For the first, he's like, you can't move around. I was like, I know I can't get the swelling out of this thing. He said, I feel really bad. Do you want a red shirt? Right. And I'm like, I'm a senior. I was supposed to get drafted this year. I want to play, I'm not getting any younger. And so anyway, so I go home. So they go to Stanford. I go home to see my dad, and we have steaks, and I was 21 at the time. So I think we probably had a couple cold beverages, and I'm like, I think I'm done, Dad. I don't know. My foot hurts all the time. I'm miserable. And he's like, well, do you like to play? And I'm like, yeah, I like to play. He's like, well, so see what happens. Like, just chill out for a little bit and take a step back. So I go back, I meet the team back there. And by the way, in 3 days, the swelling starts to go down because I hadn't been on my foot. And so we keep going and keep going. And I don't play for, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks. And Coach Horton comes up again, Ep, do you want to do the red shirt? Because I can throw you in there to pinch hit. And I'm like, you know what? The foot feels really good. Like, give me another week. And sure enough, I got in, pinch hit, and hit it double. And then the next game I started, I got 2 hits. And then the next game, I hit like a game. I think I hit a game tying double in the 9th. And then I hit a walk off in the 11th or something like that. That was the game my wife was at. So I can always remember that game. That's what did it, that game. And from then on, then I got really hot, right? Then I had probably my best week or two. And then I got really cold. And that's when the real Coach Horton came out. The real Coach Horton came out, and it was like, because I was on top of the world, right? I had home runs and RBIs, and I'm feeling good. And hey, I worked my way back and all this. And then all of a sudden you're playing, Pacific, and I'm going 0 for 4. And the calmness at which he can talk to players is something that I tried to pride myself with, and not showing emotion. And he was young. And even when we talk about it, he was a young coach when I was with him, and he changed a lot. But I tried to bring that to my coaching style, where if you hit a home run, I'm going to be very happy, but I'm not going to go crazy. And if you punch out, I want to talk to you about that strikeout later when you cool off. Like, I don't want to show emotion and say I'm upset, or you punched out a runner on second. We gave you the bunt sign. You didn't get the bunts down. Then you couldn't hit a weak ground ball to second base, right? You totally failed at your job. Everybody knows it. I'm not going to be the one to tell you that until we have maybe a post-game report, because we can learn from everything in this game. And that's what's so great about the game. It's life, right? We learn from, I didn't study enough for that test, and then I failed the test. And then I go back and say, why did I fail that test? Well, I didn't prepare for it. And that's what softball teaches kids. It's, what can we do? Why did I pop that ball up? Or why was I late on that pitch? Or why did I even swing at that pitch?
Right.
We can always learn something from, if we hit a double to the pull side or the opposite field, or we can learn something on a rollover double play ball that we hit. And if we can use our brain to compile all that information, we can be pretty good players. And I think that's why the mental side and the preparation side and understanding and being engaged on every pitch, if you possibly can in a game, makes you a better player. And it's fun. Like, softball's fun. You're supposed to be out there having a good time with your teammates and your coaches, right? But there's a lot of time between pitches to have fun, right? You're only in the batter's box for, like, I don't know, 40 seconds a game, right? That you're actually, like, actively taking swings sometimes. 40 seconds. How much time between pitches, right? 20 seconds between pitches. You and your outfielders can, make fun of each other and dance all you want. But if you can really focus in on that time that pitcher toes the rubber and throws the ball over the plate, you can really learn a lot in this game.
The dancing is what allows them to focus at a high level. It's the compromise. Boy, when I first came over, the first year coaching softball is early 90s, and I would try to turn to the dugout and talk about what just happened, and they start to cheer. And so I go, okay, all right. So the next pitch happens. I still remember what happened on the 0-1, and then they started another cheer. Like, the cheers were in succession. I was realizing they were practicing, like, their cheers, and I don't know at what point I banned cheers. Like, I was the Like I just go, guys, I can't, you know, our dugout cheers and they do things in unison, but it's a complete reversal of, oh man, I'll call it a baseball or a Horton baseball dugout hybrid with softball energy. But at this
Yeah,
time of the year, because this is when teams are forming, so there's not much.
right.
I don't want to say there's not much fun right now because the game, the competitive part of it is there, but there's so much at the beginning of the year right now. So many coaches are figuring out what their teams are, right? So you had this pitcher, now you've had her for 3 months, and what's she done, right? What's her reliability? There's different things like that. So, but it goes back to, and you mentioned this earlier in the conversation. Um, we talk about the game in a certain way, and this conversation about your upbringing, but then also how you just experienced your at bats. And I'm going to go ahead and venture forth and say, when you came back from your injury and you finally felt good enough to get in that lineup, you weren't in the mindset of like, oh, I've got to do well or I'm back on the fucking pine, right? Like you were an approach mindset, right?
Yep. It was. And the best game, and I share this with every player that I work with, because it's the one game, right? You have the one game, you probably maybe had a couple no-hitters growing up, but like I had one 3 home run game and I can still see it. I also won money at the Pepper Mill that night, when we were playing at Reno, with Tim Wallach. So we were talking about coaches that had a big influence. Tim Wallach was our assistant coach at that time, and he was the in-game specialist of what the pitcher is trying to do. I mean, there's a guy that was 16 years, I think, in the big leagues. He had that.
Great third baseman.
Um, yep. But that game at Reno, I remember, and their fans were rough, but my first at bat, I popped up towards, I don't know, the first base side, and the fans are yelling at me. And then the second time up, I think I punched out. And so by the third time up, they're like, yay, Jake's up again. Like that's a for sure out. I think they were second and third. This is the guy we want hitting. Well, anyway, I get a 2-0 fastball and I hit it out of the park. And so I'm feeling really good about myself. And then the next time up, I have this mindset where, well, I'm not going to get that pitch again. Right? Like what am I going to sit on here? So I'm like, well, he's got a slider. He's throwing a slider probably 50% of the time to everybody else. I'm going to sit on the slider. So the first pitch I get is a slider, off the plate for ball one, right? And I'm like, okay, there it is. I've seen it. I'm going to look for something up. It's got to start at my shoulder. The second pitch was a fastball, and it was like middle away, but really hittable. And I took it because I was sitting on the slider. Now the count's 1-1. And then the 1-1 pitch was a slider right down the middle of the plate, and I hit it for a home run. And I'm like, okay. So I come up my last time up, and I'm like, I haven't seen changeup yet. I haven't hit a changeup yet. So I'm going to sit on a changeup. First pitch was like a fastball in the dirt. Second pitch was a slider off the plate, right? Like they're not going to pitch to me. It's kind of what I'm thinking at this time, but I'm like, I'm still going to sit on the changeup. Sure enough, 2-0, they throw a changeup. They're just trying to get me over changeup for a strike. And I hit that over the fence. So the best game I ever had was one where you could call it guessing. And that was the bad word back in the day. My dad used to get a hard, like people would, oh, you can't guess. And he tells me this story with Larry Walker when we were living in Colorado. And my dad was on the field and he's talking, they had never met before. And my dad's picking his brain and they're talking. And my dad says, do you ever guess? And Larry said, no, man, I just see it and hit it. My dad says, oof, man, must be nice to have that kind of ability.
Right.
My dad had bad vision. Like
Right.
he had to anticipate to just compete at that level. So, and that's what Williams like. And so my dad says, well, what happens if the count is 2-0 and he can't get his breaking pitch over? And Walker says, well, then I'm sitting on a fastball. And my dad says, well, isn't that guessing? And he looks at my dad and said, no, that's just called sitting, even though we knew it was guessing.
Right. Right.
So
Sure.
it's the terminology. Guessing is a bad word, but anticipating, you use the word anticipating, which is the best word, right? Anticipate that pitch, see it, maybe close your eyes, sit in the on deck circle, what does that pitcher look? I used to make our players do that all the time because we would look at video of our opposing pitchers, or maybe you faced that pitcher 2 days ago working your way through the bracket. Can you close your eyes and see the release of that pitch? Right? You're going to face the same pitchers in these big tournaments. You're going to face those same pitchers week in and week out, and then you're going to face them in the summer when the summer rolls around. You have a database of what that pitcher throws. Can you close your eyes and visualize what that looks like? And then close your eyes and visualize what it looks like when you put a good swing on that pitch. And then boom, you go from sitting in the dugout to the on deck circle. You're visualizing in the dugout. You go to the on deck circle, you time it up, you figure out when you start moving, and then boom, you're going to get that same pitch when you get up there. And if you get that same pitch, you're going to destroy it. So this game is just, cheers are great. I mean, we had Elena Votto. She was the cheer master last year, and she could throw too. But I mean, her cheers, but there's so much to learn. And we had journalists. Riley Blampede was one of my favorite players last year. And she was one of these girls that had her entire semester planned out. Okay. So I'll never forget, we had like a team meeting, and then after the team meeting, she showed me all of her notes of what her classes were like, and she wanted to know when practices were and when her individual time with me was. And I was like, you're 3 months ahead. And she's like, well, that's just the way my brain works. But she was the most diligent of writing journals. And I would lean on her like, hey, what did we faced her,
Yeah,
blah,
sure.
blah, blah. We did a home with Clemson. What was, and she'd be like, boom, 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 boom. So the journals, like hitting journals, we talk about the debrief, riding home. And sometimes you don't want to hear it from, my kid doesn't want to hear it from me either. I usually have to give it more than the ride home before we address it. But having that conversation, sometimes if you just put it in a journal, on your way home, go through your at-bats. And then that way, when you face that same pitcher again, or that same type of pitcher, maybe you're facing somebody that's spinning it up. What did I do the last time I faced an up ball girl? Right? I had to really cheat, keep my hands on top, or I had to aim above the ball. Like that's what we would do when someone could really spin that thing up there. We're aiming 2 inches
You're
above
talking
the ball.
crazy now, and I like it. I had to aim
Yeah,
above the ball. I had to try
above
to
it.
miss it to hit it.
Try to miss
Yeah,
it.
you're in my wheelhouse.
Yes, if you
Love
miss
it.
it, I'll give you a hug if you miss it
Yeah,
above it,
I'll
right?
tell you what. You miss over the top, we're going for ice cream afterwards.
Yeah,
That
I
works with
love
travel
it.
ball
Perfect.
all the way through 18 and under. Well, anticipate also predicting.
Mhm.
Look at the game footage that basketball and football coaches go through, and the meticulous of like the plays, right? And then I'll go into an analogy like I tell our kids: when you're learning how to drive a car, you're going to think about how the car works because it's scary as heck, right? Even starting it. But watch your parents; they're not thinking about how the car works when they're driving. They're watching all the other drivers. That's the key to staying alive, and that's this type of mentality when you're playing the game is very healthy. And so I like predictability because you're seeing patterns, you're seeing behavior. I mean, that goes into predator and prey, right? Knowing behavior and waiting for the prey because you know their behavior. So educated guessing, right? Anticipating, just a word. There was a
Yeah.
connotation with it. But if you're not anticipating something, um, I still haven't met many softball players that can just see it and hit it. There's always information to be taken in. Even the lack of I don't want to say ability, but efficiency on the other team factors into how we would make decisions on, are we only going to anticipate balls in the dirt when we're behind in the count? We get a ball in the dirt
Yes.
any pitch with this particular type of pitcher that we're facing. So a lot of that stuff is interesting. I want to go into our last kind of section and phase here. So and when you just talked about missing over the ball to hit it, and somewhere that's where you and I have kind of connected here because the first couple conversations I was pretty outspoken on just where I don't like to take our players because of what their typical experience already is. It's not a matter of um, my preference for me. It's these people that we care for in our organization. And really, I'll be honest with you, in all of softball, anybody that's hitting, I care for anybody that's experiencing this game, all coaches, parents, and players, is that experience isn't where it needs to be. The actual experience. So yes, I love the concept of playing. Yes, I love the concept of coaching. Yes, I love the concept of providing for my kids. But the actual weekend to weekend experience is this. It's tormenting. It's anguish. It's fighting in bed at night with the spouse over recruiting or different things like that. And And there's such great news to like this perspective that you and I talk about, because everything that we've spoken about today, anyone that's listening, nothing went over their head. Like nothing. Like you got a little into front arm stuff, which could say, okay, so maybe that's related to extension, right? Or lack of, or something, what happens. But really, everything's been pretty much surface. But then I would ask your own level of self-awareness. Where is your dialogue when you're talking to your kids as a coach, as a parent, or your dialogue as a player of how do you speak about the game? So I'm going to go back about when would you say, Jake, when would you say, because we've been around a long time, and there's always been different methodologies, or I don't want to say fads, but there's Charlie Lau back in the day. There's Ted
Yeah,
Williams. There's different beliefs, right?
sure.
What year would you say the term launch angle started to come into play? What would you say in your
Uh, Maybe 2017,
okay,
18.
and I was thinking 2016. All right, so I'm gonna give you some baseball almanac stats that I
Okay.
learned this week. All right, and I'm gonna go a 20-year span. Okay, 2004 to 2024. All right, so we're gonna look at the year 2004, and we're gonna look
Mhm.
at the year 2024. All right, in 2004, the amount of at bats in the major leagues total was 167,000. Okay, 167,000 at bats. 2024, 164,000. So 3,000 less at bats, but pretty close to the same.
Yeah.
Okay, relevant because as we start to get into questions like, all right, what was the team batting average, right? So the team batting average in 2004 was 266. Okay, across the board. All right,
Wow.
2020 or 24, 243. Okay, that's 23-point difference.
Yeah.
All right. Now, somewhere along this conversation, if we're talking about, hey, I don't want to hit the ball on the ground, this mentality, right? I want to lift, I want to drive it over. Somewhere the key answer here is going to be in home runs. All right. We're just looking at the
Yes.
compromise now for this approach. All right. So we've already lost 23 points on the batting average.
Mhm.
Okay. I'm going to go to strikeouts. Strikeouts in 2004, 31,828. Okay. 2004, 30, so 32,000.
32.
2024, 42,000. So that's an increase of 10,000 strikeouts with 3,000 less at bats. Okay. So now what we have is we have the team batting averages have dropped 23 points. The strikeouts have increased 10,000. So I don't know what the number is, but when I went to this last number, I said, okay, there's got to be a number in the trade-off of home runs that says, okay, but that's our trade-off, right? So
Mhm.
it's not happening as often, and we're seeing them strike out more often, but the ball's landing in the stands more often. All
Mhm.
right, so here's the drum roll. 2004 total home runs, 5,451. Okay, 54-51. 2024, 5,453. 2 home runs more. It's crazy.
Wow. That's
So
because
only
Cousins playing
so
in
we
a
got we
sport.
got 2 home runs more. Okay, we got 3,000 less at bats, but we lost 23 points off the batting average. We went increased into so I'm not
What
going to
about
sit
runs
here and
scored or slugging?
didn't I'll get into that maybe our next
Yeah.
conversation. But these were the high ones to me to go because the bottom line is we want to see the home run, right? Now
Yeah. Yeah.
productivity is more, right? But
Yeah.
that is if I'm like a financial advisor on this investment, I'm going, I don't I maybe the return on investment is coming,
Yeah.
but you're already now at an 8-year trend. And if we go back to 2016, 17, I even went back and looked at the team batting average in the almanac back to the 1800s. And there weren't too many. If I were to say like between 240 and 245 might be the lowest, last year's was in the top 5 all-time lowest team batting
Really.
average. So it's kind of dropped to the bottom. Now the game's exciting. There's a lot of things going on. Like the game's exciting probably because of the in-game metrics, right? There's a lot of
Yeah.
things going on. You can gamble on each pitch now, like that whole engagement, right? A lot of that's there. But just look at that for criteria as we go into like the part of the conversation where we talk about how you and I can collaborate. to help the ambitious. So we have a term that we've created, a select program for the Firecrackers. We have a couple select teams. This is really to identify the higher level and higher ambitious players. It's not an appetite. Okay, that attention to detail that you and I are talking about isn't for everybody, right? Rec ballers don't need to know the count on their last 7 at bats. They just want to play this game and cheer and do their banners and do their hair, right? And so I'm not saying that every player in this org, not every coach or every parent has to aspire to be, but don't fool yourself if you do aspire to be this. If you do aspire to be a P4 or a Division 1 athlete or compete at the highest, because that's really now what this opportunity. Now, that doesn't mean they're the only ones that can have this conversation, but if you think of those numbers and you and I talk about functionality, right? Being able to execute the task at hand. That task could be it's time to drive the ball, right? Because yes, as a college coach, you want to see the power, you want to see the numbers, you want to see what those kids do, but you don't want to see a kid up there with runners on first and second, no out in a semifinal game in the final 8 to go to the championship series, go up and swing too big and then pull the ball to third base because they threw her an inside drop. And now dude, that's affecting our strategy. So there's a lot of things that go into that still contribute to the home runs, right? We had a former home run king champion in our organization, and but it's functionality. So you and I are going to figure out how to collaborate and how to, because my responsibility to the whole organization is to create and run different departments that are delivering resources, education, and things that are of value. My God, there's plenty of places to go for general information on batting, right? There's plenty of instructors that our kids are already going to get good general knowledge from good people, right? You didn't ask to be the son of a big leaguer. You didn't ask to be the son of a dad that spent time with Ted Williams, but that is what it is. So, Jake, you're at a different level, right? And so, us offering insight, us sharing stories, and then you formalizing this education to hitters, which you have done, which is now in a place I've never done, is I'm excited about us being able to collaborate and being able to deliver something that to our players that will be affordable, that'll be manageable, and then probably different tiered things as we go through this. So a general kind of participation, and then something that's a little more exclusive or more for those that can handle that kind of commitment, whether it's financial time or whatever it is. But where would you like to see? Because you reaching out to me and just your initial presentation of, working with the Firecrackers really kind of perked my ears, and I really appreciate that. So in your mind, where as a vision could this go, knowing that we're going to fill in the details here as time goes on, and then hopefully roll something out for the first of the year?
Yeah, I think we talked a lot about it today, where it's not the mechanical part, it's not the amount of time you put in your garage or with your hitting coach. It's how do we make that applicable to a game, and how do we show our best self in front of, and when you're talking about your select teams, in front of recruiting coordinators, in front of head coaches at all these different schools, because that's where the next level is. It's that kind of thinking. And I want to be able to bring that thinking to 14-year-olds, to 16-year-olds, to 18-year-olds, to give them an advantage over the competition that's out there and get them thinking the right way. So what we talked about doing is really having me in your corner watching your at-bats, going through, I would have you take a journal and write down your at-bats and what pitches you got and what counts you got and what the result was. And then now you have somebody to share that with, somebody that's seen it, somebody that's done it at every level, major league level, the SEC level. Like, we can have those conversations, and I can lead you into the right direction of, okay, let's create a plan here. Where's our soft spot in the zone? Okay, we don't handle that pitch really well. When you're ahead in the count and there's nobody on base, this is the area of the strike zone you need to get dead red and attack. Okay, now all of a sudden the count has changed. Where did our thinking go? Or the situation of the game changed, or the person on deck, the person hitting behind you, is hot. She's got 2 home runs today. They don't want to walk you. There's 2 outs. You are going to get great pitches to hit. Okay. Or vice versa. The person on deck hasn't made contact all day today, and first base is open. Okay. You can't have an over aggressive mindset in that situation because they're going to pitch around you. But it might also mean you can sit on a changeup, like I talked about in the one story of my one career highlight. You can sit on that changeup because they might want you just to chase. And then all of a sudden you ambush them because they're throwing a 2-0 changeup or a 2-1 changeup right down the middle and you burned them. So that's what I'm passionate about. That part of the game is so intriguing. And quite honestly, it will provide way more success than mechanics. Because if you're playing on the Firecrackers select team, you probably have a pretty good swing. If you've worked with Tony, especially, I know what he teaches, like you have a good swing. How do we make that swing work at higher levels? How do we get that advantage against that number one pitcher that you're facing that's going to play at UCLA? Like that's the one I want to face.
Yeah.
Man, everybody's watching her this weekend. I get a couple line drives off her because I got the right mindset and I know what pitches to look for. Boom. So essentially, this program is like having your own scouting report, how to create your own scouting report for yourself as you work your way through, because really it can start at age 12, like it started with me by having conversations. And so I can be there looking in at your practice. How are you practicing? How are we setting up practices? What pitches are we hitting? In games, what were our game decisions and results? And I would love to do like a webinar every month where we talk about like case studies. You know, what pitcher did we face? Well, we faced, whoever it was that's going to Stanford. And this is how she attacked it. And we have everybody in the room on this webinar, and we talk about how was your at bat? How was your at bat? Okay, how would we face her next time? How would we face that kind of pitcher next time? And as the education builds amongst your team, now all of a sudden your teammates are having conversations with each other. How did she pitch you? Okay, well, you're a slapper, so it doesn't matter. I don't want to talk to you, right? But if you're in the middle,
And boy, does that make us happy when we hear our players talking to each
yes.
other about what they saw and what they did. That is like just absolute heaven for us. And there's also a place, Jake, where because there's so much dialogue and there's so much external kind of information going into these players. But I think we also, and again, I'm going to use that term like emulate. Here's what the best hitters are doing. So there might be 17 different theories, 17 different instructors. If that hitter was their student, what they think that hitter was thinking to get to that picture, let's just say point of contact. But here's 17 pictures of point of contact, and they're pretty much all the same. So I think we do want to be able to uh, unveil the truth of hitting, and I call the absolutes. So, what is extension, what happens with the hips, certain pitches, so that this is just what happens. This isn't what we're saying you have to think. This is just the absolute. That's part of what I say the challenge that the launch angle conversation created was it talked about what actually happens. So then there was an emphasis on that, which then it over tilted, and it's going to, like everything else, it's going to correct itself. Also, a great 12-year-old Golden Gloves boxer has a great corner man, great corner person. And you mentioned this. I would love for you to be the corner man for the Firecracker organization, for our players to have you in their corner. And in a general sense, because again, we have to prepare for a very high level of participation, right? So the once a month, because we do our national players meetings and we have really good attendance on those, to just check in with everybody to say, hey, this is what we're doing, right? In the corner man club, whatever we're going to call it. And
Yeah.
and then, hey, here's when we're meeting, because we're not, and anyone that knows me knows we're not trying to pull you in. The average cost for a Firecracker is about $27 a month if you're at a 14-player roster. Okay, 16-player roster, you're at $25 a month. Okay, people, I cannot pull in these experts and these professionals for $25 a month and split it up 92 different ways. But I'm always protective of the lack of disposable income that we have. So there's a volume opportunity that minimizes expenses that allows us to be able to feel good about the time that Jake spends with us, because time is a commodity. We don't have a ton of time. So when we have the accessibility, the availability to people, I'm always prepared, because I never anticipated the growth of the Firecrackers to the point that it was. I'm always prepared for something to get out of hand in a good way, that we have an extremely high level of participation. And how would you be able to deliver these concepts? Well, if I'm sign up number 272, but I'm tuning in to just hear you talking about, and maybe girls are just saying, hey, I have an example of an at bat this weekend. So you use her at bat, everyone's talking about it. I guarantee there's going to be 45 other players that go, oh man, that happened to me this weekend. And there's that dialogue. And then I'm looking forward to you being able to deliver the takeaways so that they're walking away with their journals, capturing the story, changing their dialogue, changing their perspective, and me being able to come into the kitchen every now and then go, mwah, chef's kisses all the way around, because this was a fun conversation, Jake. I unfortunately I got to wrap it up. We got
It
stuff to
was
do.
fun. It always
It
is
goes
fun.
it
This
goes by fast. Wiffle ball game goes by fast, and
no,
there was no negative. There's no yeah, but don't you think? Okay,
there's
yeah,
no
you
room for
can live
that.
in that space, but that's not what creates a thriving environment, right? That's not what inspires people. People just trying to outdo each other and prove each other wrong. I get that. Listen, we compete for a living. So I know how to get real and how to get in the ring and fight. That's what we're teaching our young ladies, is how to get in the box and believe that there's nothing that pitcher has that they can't hit, right? That they can crush everything. So a big part of that is just the consistency of this dialogue. I love everything that you say, every direction that you're coming from, your personal experiences. And so my opinion is we are really, really fortunate that however our paths connected, man. I don't know what's around the next corner, but I'm excited about it because every corner gets better and better and better. So I appreciate your time today. We're going to touch base. You and I are pretty good at this Tuesday thing as long as I calendar it. So you and I will touch base again next week and then really start to construct this of the holiday delivery of the messaging to our organization. So I want people to know, and I'm going to hold myself accountable. We're going to create kind of the marketing to this over the holidays, and then ideally for me around Christmas time before that to the first of the year so that we could start 2025 like in a good goal setting fashion. And then again, a new perspective, new path, new value, and man, new softball experience. Doesn't sound so bad, right?
Let's do it. I'm super excited. Like, there's nothing I enjoy more than working with young people and watching them grow and watching the energy build with something new that they learned when they put it into action. And with your players, I mean, your players, they compete, right? And they're into it and they're intense, and the sky's the limit.
And we're going to show the kids in American Samoa who have very little resources, or even up in Alaska, that look, it doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be this. Just take your knowledge, but here's the best way to practice at home. So listen, brother, I appreciate you. Great, great stuff. You and I will get in touch again next week. We'll kind of catch up and then start this whole thing out. Stay tuned, everybody. We're going to roll this podcast out sometime before Thanksgiving. And then again, you'll be hearing more on this collaboration. Super excited. Jake, you're the man. Appreciate you.
Thanks,
All
Tone.
right.
You're on.
We'll talk to you soon, man.
Okay. Bye. Bye.